Welcome to Disposable Society, where we sift through the garbage that is stereotypes and discrimination about disability and pick out the treasures of advocacy, innovation, and inclusion. My name is Caitlin, and for those with visual disabilities, I will describe my appearance. Today I am wearing a long-sleeved green shirt, my hair is down, it is dark, and I have bangs that are swished to the side. There's also a fern in the background behind my right shoulder, and behind my left shoulder is a mannequin wearing a crochet sweater that has an eyeball on it in green shades, and then above that is a neon sign that is in the silhouette of a head, and where the brain would be it says open, and above that is a sign that says Disposable Society, and it is made out of cardboard and disposable materials. For those with auditory disabilities, I will post the transcript of the episode at my Substack, linked below, and they include descriptions of all of the visuals in the episode if anyone needs them. Find all of the articles I used for this week's episode in the description, and please like, subscribe, and leave comments to help make this community better. We're going to encounter some terms in this episode that will help you gain a deeper understanding of power dynamics, especially between the most elite and the most oppressed. If you want to write down these 3 definitions to have handy, just pause the video when I get to each one. They'll become even more clear within the context of this episode. First, hegemony. Hegemony is the dominance of one social group over another. Second, capital. Capital in this context is the currency of hegemony. Capital buys power, not just through wealth. Capital can be social. If someone has a lot of friends, they have more influence and thus more power. It can also be cultural. If a person is part of the dominant culture in a region, if you go to Notre Dame, you have cultural capital in South Bend or Mishawaka, for example. Social and cultural capital are more subtle than economic capital, but are very powerful in garnering hegemony. Okay, third, subaltern. Subaltern is a noun used to describe those who are subordinated, who lack access to capital and power, and who are most oppressed by elite. We'll talk about all of these terms in a general sense, and then use Hans Christian Andersen's version of the Little Mermaid fairy tale to understand those complex but very useful concepts. Have you ever been accused of lying and tried everything you could to prove your innocence? Did you find that no matter what you said, the accuser had already made up their mind? If you've experienced this, then you've gotten a sample of what it's like to not have your perspective heard. Some people live their entire lives without getting their perspective heard. They are pre-subjectivized or stereotyped in society. Society has already decided who they are and packaged it in a neatly labeled box. Their true experience does not fit into the elite narrative of society. People are too distracted by reading and listening to mainstream formats to make space for alternative narratives. Or telling their stories never happens at all, because they are busy trying to simply survive and put food on the table. These muted, marginalized people are who social theorist Gramsci called the subaltern. Subaltern comes from the root word sub, which means below, and altern, which means other. So just looking at etymology, subaltern means below the others. Quite literally, the word is used to describe the most marginalized and vulnerable groups of people who exist outside of mainstream society and who do not have agency within socio-economic power structures. Subaltern theory builds upon Marxist theory of elite practices of hegemony. Where Marx central theory is based in economic hegemonic practices by elite structures, think a corporation monopolizing a market and hiking up prices. Gramsci expands upon this to include cultural and social hegemonic practices as significant in the production of power. Think capturing the literary canon and projecting a specific narrative in textbooks, propaganda by media outlets, or propping up certain celebrities to influence the public. Remember last week when I gave the visual of Otera's spinal cord unit's social hierarchy? The patients existed on an island outside of the staff's social hierarchy. Therefore, they had no access to upward mobility and were subjected to dehumanization. Subalternity is that, but on a larger scale. Let's say the institution, or the state as it is called in subaltern theory, is America. Within America is a mainstream socio-cultural hierarchy. It is possible to utilize literature, media, and other modes of elite social capital to gain upward mobility. Previously unknown people can create platforms on the internet and become influencers, for example. So they gain social and cultural capital, which transforms into economic capital. Capital is the currency of power. More capital, social, cultural, and economic, equates to more power. The subaltern, while still existing within that state, does not have access to the socio-cultural hierarchy or forms of capital to gain upward mobility. In the U.S., immigrants and people with disabilities are two groups that can be considered subaltern. Even children can be considered subaltern as well. The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen is really useful for illustrating the dynamic of the subaltern and the elite state. The state in The Little Mermaid is just the world. The mainstream class hierarchy and the subaltern are each represented figuratively through metaphors of land and sea. The land is representative of the class hierarchy, and the sea is representative of the subaltern. Readers are given the ultimate representation of the elite hegemon through the prince's character, and the ultimate representation of the subaltern through a child who does not have a standard human figure, symbolic of disability. Gayatri Spivak discusses internal hierarchies in her landmark writing, Can the Subaltern Speak?, written in 1988, wherein there are dominant groups even within subaltern societies. This internal hierarchy is represented most clearly by the juxtaposition of the Little Mermaid's dominant status in comparison to the destitute isolation of the sea witch. For example, the Little Mermaid is adorned with flowers, pearls, and oysters during a coming-of-age ritual. The sea witch, in stark contrast, lives in the middle of nowhere. The tale says, quote, "No flowers grow there, nor any seaweed. The trees squirmed, joint by joint, from their roots to their outermost tentacles. And whatever they could lay hold of, they twirled around and never let go." I think it is important to underscore here, while it is easy to turn this story into one about good versus evil, we need to uphold nuance. The world we live in is far too eager to reduce societal issues and current events to the binary good versus bad, or right versus wrong, or left versus right, because it is easy. And morality is an easy way to create docile bodies. Remember last week when we talked about that term? The sea witch is not evil. She lives where there are no resources, where even the trees will cling on to whatever life-sustaining nutrients they can find. Every being that lives there is in survival mode. When people are in desolate environments with no means to achieve sustenance, let alone upward mobility, they are more likely to partake in behavior they otherwise would not. Think Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As the fairy tale goes, the sea witch asks the Little Mermaid for her voice in exchange to have legs and live among the humans. In the Andersen version, the Little Mermaid has been told by her ancestors that only humans have immortal souls. This is her core motivation, not love. Once she rescues the prince, love just adds to her urgency. As part of the bargain with the sea witch, the prince must fall in love with her in 1 year, or she will turn into sea foam and her soul will cease to exist. After the Little Mermaid accepts the deal and loses her voice, she experiences what many subalterns do who are adopted into elite models. She becomes a poster child, iconicized, subjectivized, infantilized. Think Frida Kahlo, Helen Keller. The prince says he can't possibly love her because he can't speak to her. This represents the elite nature of linguistic and literary forms of communication. While Spivak admits the subaltern can in fact speak in her essay, we need to ask ourselves if we are willing to listen to unique forms of communication. Speaking and listening do not just involve the vocal cords and the ears. Next episode, we will be discussing a unique form of communication that some researchers are observing in nonverbal autistic children. We see how the administration has, just in the past couple of days, staged a socio-cultural hegemonic act upon the autistic community. It is timely and necessary to be discussing. Despite the Little Mermaid's effort to utilize the elite socio-cultural models, her body language, the physical pain she puts herself through, she is never able to get the prince to listen to her perspective. He knows she exists, and he acknowledges that she exists, but he does not listen to her. He places his predetermined stereotypes about people who have speech disabilities upon her, labeling her his dumb little foundling. Her new feet feel like knives are stabbing her with every step she takes. Yet she dances for the elites to try to be seen and to gain social capital. She makes a spectacle of herself like people with disabilities being paraded in freak shows during America's infancy. She hurts herself to gain capital, something many people with disabilities do by participating in the workforce despite injuries. The day before the 1 year is over, the sea witch gives the Little Mermaid the option to kill the prince in order to turn back into a mermaid, but she cannot bring herself to commit the act. In the end, she jumps off of a cliff and kills herself. In society, the elite need the subaltern in order to exist. Spivak argues that the subaltern is not pushed out of society, but used by it for political purposes. The elite gain hegemony through public performances of subjugation onto subaltern groups. This is how they show their power to others in society. Next episode, I will detail how a recent press conference did just that through the subjugation of nonverbal autistic children. This is a somber week for the disability community. It is times like these that we need to express ourselves in any way we can. My professor told me that the reason power institutions are so intent on subjugating certain groups is because of the very fact that we are so powerful. We are disruptors of their disillusioned narrative. We threaten their hegemony and their ability to gain social capital, and we will always find a way to grow through the cracks of subjugation that they try to layer upon us.